Welcome to our Arkansas Hog Hoops Recruiting Report. As always, we're joined by Kevin McPherson. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time.
Nick, always good to be with you guys.
Now, we got a lot to go over today. I got the list here. We're going to start out with a couple familiar faces and names that we've touched on throughout this recruiting season. And one of them, the first off, Nick Smith Jr., the five-star combo guard out of Little Rock.
Yeah, I mean, transferring from Sylvan Hills and North Little Rock was big news. This young man just really was already a five-star in my opinion, but now the recruiting services are formally recognizing as a top 20 guy, five-star. I've had him. I just put out my grassroots, all Arkansas grassroots teams, and I had him as my player of the year. He earned that, especially in July on the Nike YBL circuit. But all Arkansas fans right now, all Hog fans are focused on this upcoming official visit to Fayetteville, September 10th through 12th weekend, the same weekend Arkansas hosts Texas on the football field. And, this is big for Arkansas to get another five-star player on campus. We saw several that did in June, but to get Nick Smith Jr., who I really think Arkansas is in the thick of it for his services. Kentucky and Alabama in the picture, so are some other schools. He's already visited, Alabama, Auburn. He's taking a visit to Kansas, Georgetown. So I think Arkansas getting this official visit, we'll see where other visits may shake out with Kentucky and potentially Oklahoma. But I think Arkansas really is in a good spot for Nick Smith Jr. I'm not saying they're going to get him, but I think once they get him back on campus, it's been a couple of years since he took his first unofficial visit when Eric Musselman was, kind of new on the scene. And now getting him back for this official visit, it's just a couple of weeks away. I really like Arkansas's chances to stay right in the picture, perhaps improve where they stand with him, and potentially land his services. And look, it's already a top 10 rated class when you look at Joseph Pinion, Darian Ford, Barry Dunning Jr., typically ranked right now among the top 10 recruiting classes in the country. But you land a guy like Nick Smith Jr., I think it not only solidifies a top 10, but maybe nudges his class up around the top 5 again, like they did in 2020 when it was four in-state guys led by Moses Moody, Devo Davis, Jalen Williams, and KK Robinson that signed on with the Hogs.
They're being consistent, always keeping him as a top priority. And another person they're keeping as a top priority, you mentioned five stars. This is one of the best in the country. Jordan Walsh, ranked number 10 on ESPN's top 100. Where does he stand with the Hogs?
Well, he's been climbing those recruiting ladders when you talk about rankings, right? And so he's already taken 3 visits, TCU, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. He had a great visit with Arkansas, but that was back in late June. So it's been, really when you start talking about now all of July going by all of August, Arkansas looked to be in great shape with him because he didn't pack in any more visits. And the visit went so well, according to both sides of that deal. But now he's lining up some more visits, and that's understood because he started adding more offers as his recruiting rankings shot up at Kansas, Arizona State, are a couple of those. And, really, I think when I start looking at the scenarios now for Jordan Walsh, I'm not as confident in feeling that Arkansas maybe was a slight lean for him. But I do think Arkansas is still in the mix, and I still think Arkansas has its chances. But the fact that he's now a couple of months after his visit set up more visits upcoming here through the fall, anytime it's a guy that's, out of state to begin with and getting more and more recruiting attention, and now he's going to take more visits, you just kind of take a breath, a pause, and you just hope things work out in the end. But Jordan Walsh is a guy that Eric Musselman and his staff would love to have along with Nick Smith Jr.
There's a lot of bobbers in that water. It's hoping they can reel him in. And that's understood, as you said, as he keeps climbing those rankings now at number 10. Now, those are two guys, Smith Jr. and Walsh, we've touched on throughout our recruiting reports as of late. One we haven't really touched on, it's kind of bursting onto the scene, is Keyron Lindsey out of Denton, Texas. He's a 4-star. What can you tell us about Lindsey?
Well, we know Arkansas and Eric Musselman, they don't waste time, whether it's on-court preparation, in-game adjustments. Eric Musselman dazzles us daily with something on social media. But recruiting sometimes goes that way too, and this staff is not afraid to jump in with both feet. Keyron Lindsey had a big July on the Nike YBL circuit, one of the breakout performers, sort of an under-radar guy, late bloomer, however you want to phrase it. But now he's inched up toward the top 100, a 4-star prospect. Rivals just updated its rankings in the week, and he came in at 104th in those rankings, a 4-star. But he announced an Arkansas offer last Monday. On the same day, later that day, he released his top 8 schools. The Hogs were among it, as were Tennessee, Georgia, Texas A&M, Oklahoma State, and UNLV. But when you look at the list, when you look at the offer, and then a couple of days later, you add in a Zoom call between the entire staff. He'd been mostly talking to assistant coach Clay Moser at that point, but got on the phone with Muss, the rest of the Razorback staff, and but from both sides of it, I'm getting, especially from Kyron Lindsey, it was not only a productive Zoom meeting, it was good for him, but he said the biggest takeaway, what all the recruits seem to say, is all the NBA experience on the coaching staff is what stood out. So that always helps Arkansas. When you start thinking about recruiting now, it's roster turnover year to year, not as much long-term growth and development. There's still some of that, but you see a lot of roster turnover. So for players, you can build a relationship in a short time because they're thinking in terms of short time. They don't want to play the college game any more than they have to. They want to get to the next level and make money. Eric Musselman's a guy that has shown the chops, not only as a coach in various pro levels, but now at Arkansas so far with a one and done, the first ever at Arkansas in just his second season on a team that had a lot of success. So these are selling points. I think Kyron Lindsey is a guy that's listening and paying attention. He's got 4 visits already scheduled. I named some of the teams on his top 8. Arkansas is trying to work its way into a potential visit with one more for him to fill out. So we'll see if the Razorbacks become maybe his 5th official visit. And he does plan to make a decision and sign in the early period.
A 6'8" power forward, kind of a combo forward, a 4-star out of Denton, Texas, has shot up those rankings, as you mentioned, unranked to 104 in the nation, is a guy to keep our eye on. Now, you have a few names that Arkansas is not just pursuing, already offered, and we have a list of them. What can you tell me about the new 3 offers, Bay Fall, Hussein Diop, KJ Lewis for Arkansas?
Well, their class of 2023 recruiting target. So Arkansas obviously is trying to wrap up 2022. We went over some of that, but recruiting continues. And, they spent a lot of time on the road in July with the live evaluations. It couldn't do that last year because of COVID. But when you go back to June, mid-June is when college Division I coaches can make direct contact for the first time in mid-June, with class of 2023 prospects. One of those was KJ Lewis, whose name you just mentioned, a 6'4" guard out of El Paso, top 25 player nationally. And so Arkansas reached out to him. A couple of months later now, we're looking at an offer, right? Arkansas's made that offer earlier in the week. Really, I thought it was a trio of offers on Tuesday last week, KJ Lewis being one of them. But then there's a couple of teammates with the 17 and under Colorado Hawks, a couple of Colorado high school prospects. Both of them are 6'10". Bay Fall is a top 10 national recruit, a 5-star, a guy that I've been able to watch play personally. Believe me, he in person, he is a 5-star prospect. He does a lot of things on a basketball court that to me translate to one and done potential lottery pick in a couple of years. So he's a guy that now Arkansas has offered along with his teammate. You mentioned Diop, another 6'10" player center. He's a national top 150 guy. He's got a nice offer list, a lot of big men with what he brings to the floor, regardless of where the rankings are going to have an impressive offer list. So he does. So Arkansas is kind of taking the angle there of offering a couple of teammates in that 2023 class. But again, Bay Fall, KJ Lewis, both of them 5-star type guys. And, it doesn't surprise me one bit that Eric Musselman, again, casts that wide net, reaches out beyond the state lines. Arkansas's got a lot of high-level players in state. Arkansas does the due diligence there, but casting that wide net nationally, getting some of these offers out. Of course, they got to watch these guys back in July, and that recruitment will continue for class of 2023 moving forward.
The one big thing this signals, you mentioned a top 10 recruiting class already coming in, and now every single prospect we talk about every week now is a top 100 guy or borderline or going to be in that conversation. That is huge when it comes to Razorback basketball and just the future. You can see the projection already just by how they're recruiting. But Kevin, aside from recruiting, we got to talk about the guys who are here practicing. All right. Some we obviously know first week of classes already done. The basketball players on campus, they had a little bit of break, but now they're getting in their first week of practices. What did you see, or what can you tell us about how the first week went for the Hogs?
I think it was a success. You had 8 weeks of limited summer practices. They had the 3-week break, as you mentioned. Classes started back. Everybody got back on campus last week. And in this first week, what they really focused on was sort of reviewing what they went over in 8 weeks. Eric Musselman, among other things, what they worked on during those 8 weeks in the summer When you start talking about actually installing things, some of their pick and roll defenses, some of their press breaks, working on spacing and shot selection, things of that nature. So that was just a few of the items I bring up. But when it makes sense when you have so much roster turnover, even though you went over a lot of things, for basically 8 consecutive weeks, you come back and you start to review some of those things. So it wasn't as much about working on new things and installing new things. It was sort of a review. And I think that was obviously a smart thing to do. Again, a lot of new faces. And we know the formula with Eric Musselman. He's going to change the combinations, look at different personnel packages. So I'm sure during practices they did more of that as the week progressed. But again, right now, it's still limited practice in terms of only 4 hours per week. That's going to go on now. That was the case in week one, back to practice. Over the next couple of weeks into mid-September, then they'll be able to double that on-court time to 8 hours. But, it's interesting. Eric Musselman's always working social media when there's practices. They had a pizza delivery after the first day of practice back. They had visitors in like they always do. Former Hog star from just a year ago, guard Jalen Tate was on campus to visit. Mike Conley Jr. and Sr. were in the performance center this past week, watching practice. And then something interesting, KK Robinson, Arkansas every year under Musselman, they have a mile run. They're tested with mile times. Each player, has a goal, a target goal for finishing the mile in a certain time, relative, specific, tailored to that individual player. So it seems like all the Razorbacks have now passed that mile run test with the exception of one. But KK Robinson did his mile attempted it for the first time this past week and clocked 5:12, which Musselman went to Twitter and said that was set the standard for the best time for the mile run at Arkansas. So kudos to KK Robinson because fans are paying attention to his recovery. Everything I heard from those 8 weeks of summer practice was how much he was excelling on the court. And speaking of last week in KK Robinson, he did on an individual basis. Had a workout with Isaiah Joe and Mike Conley Jr., who I mentioned was in town. A couple of NBA vets now. Joe going in his second season. Mike Conley, a longtime player and an all-star. But the word I got from that workout is, again, KK Robinson is very impressive. Look for him in year two to emerge. And we talked about recruiting, how important it is. That 2020 class ranked top 5 in the country by ESPN. We saw what Moses Moody did. We saw what Devo Davis and Jalen Williams did basically midway through the season. KK got hurt. Look for him to have a big impact on this upcoming Arkansas season. And if Arkansas is going to live up to preseason top 10, top 15, rankings, it's a guy like KK Robinson is going to have a big hand in that.
Then a 5:12 mile time probably tells you he's good to go, which is always good news for Arkansas fans, and then could emerge just like Devo did late in the season. But surely Eric Musselman happy to have a guy like KK Robinson back in the fold for him, another weapon he can use. Kevin McPherson, thank you so much for taking the time. That will wrap things up for our Hog Hoops Report this week.